Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 24, 2021. Measures regarding the use of masks in the House of Commons precinct have been extended until June 23, 2022. Please note that masks must be worn in committee rooms except when members are at their place during parliamentary proceedings. However, it is strongly recommended that members wear a mask even when they are not at their place during parliamentary proceedings. All those inside the committee room should follow best practices of maintaining proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer provided. As the chair, I will enforce these measures, and I thank you for your cooperation. To ensure an orderly meeting, please note that you may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you have the choice of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your microphone should be on mute, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. So today we are continuing our study on the Canada-United States relationships and its impacts on the electrical vehicle, softwood lumber, and other sectors. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, the committee is resuming the study on our relationship and on the impacts. Today's meeting pertains to the softwood lumber sector. With us today by video conference as an individual is Mark Warner, Counsel, Pilot Law LLP, Alberta Forest Products Association, Jason Cripps, President and Chief Executive Officer, British Columbia Council of Forest Industry, Susan Jurovic, President and Chief Executive Officer, Forest Products Association of Canada, Derek Nigber, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Quebec Forest Industry Council, Jean-François Semeray, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Michelle Vincent, Director, Economics and Trade. And from the Quebec Wood Export Bureau, Sylvain Labbé, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to all of you. I apologize for the delay. And we will start with Mr. Warner for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the invitation to be here with you today. So as you know, my name is Mark Warner. I'm a Canadian and an American trade lawyer, and I have been associated with this softwood lumber file from many, many years, dating back to before I actually was a law student, when I worked for Professor Alan Rugman, the late Alan Rugman at the University of Toronto, and then as an American lawyer at various law firms that represented Canada, and then as a director of legal director of the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade in the province of Ontario. So I've seen this from multiple different perspectives: an academic economist, an American lawyer, and a Canadian lawyer, as someone who pays the bills for the lawyers in the United States, and someone who gets paid by Canadians in the United States to talk about softwood lumber. So the interesting thing, I guess, this file has been around forever, and I think the way I look at this file, as I look at it over a great many years, is that it seems to me it's not really the kind of trade dispute that lends itself to fundamental, permanent dispute resolution. Because fundamentally, I think what's going on in this file is a battle of conception of trade law and policy. To the American mind, they look at practices in Canada around lumber and timber and forest management, and they see basically non-market economics. We may not agree. And to us, we look at a bunch of trade agreements and we sort of say as Canadians, well, we've negotiated these trade agreements with you, and we think that we can go to a series of trade dispute fora, whether it's under the old NAFTA or now under CUSMA or the WTO, and we can win narrow technical victories based on legal issues or accounting issues, and then we can fight again. So the issue, I mean, I guess I don't see really an end to that unless, basically we find some mechanism to make the Americans producers essentially say, cry uncle, which my guess is they probably won't do, even with all of the best arguments about the cost of houses and all of that. It's just the American trade system, not unlike ours, because we have the same fundamental base, is really a system that's based on basically producer interests, and much more so than consumer interests. And I guess in the American perspective as well, there are some processes which American producers can launch. We always take that in Canada as being the launch of a political process, but from the American perspective, it's just producers following their law. And they, the rule of law means they go through a process. So the issue I think that as I think about this today, how does softwood lumber fit into where we are? It seems to me there is a question for Canada fundamentally is, are we okay with this? Do we want to keep on going on having disputes that we settle through these various international trade fora? Or do we want to find some way of negotiating some kind of a market access solution or some kind of rules to buy some measure of peace? Now, I get the most recent situation is the economics on both sides of the border seems to be that the answer is no to that. The question that I have, I guess, is where does this issue of softwood lumber fit into the larger trade relationship between Canada and the U.S.? And there it seems to me, if we're looking for a political settlement as opposed to sort of just continuing on the legal route, you're going to have to rely on the goodwill to some extent of the various players in the United States at the government level. And there I have some concerns that we have been perhaps a bit more bellicose in terms of the way we go about trade policy. Part of that's understandable in relation to the last occupant of the White House, but I do think that it has carried forward into this new Biden presidency, where it seems to me we have our elbows up as we go into the corners a lot. At least I think that's very clearly the perception in Washington. So the question then is, if you want to make, is there an opportunity here, it seems to me, to look for a grand bargain where we can say to the Americans, look, we if you help us with softwood and we help us with Keystone or whatever it is, we will make some concrete attempts to deal with some of the issues that are front of mind to you, having regard to the global trade situation, supply chains, critical minerals. And there, I think that probably means doing more than talking about critical mineral supply, but actually figuring out how we can be more like the Australians. How can we actually get the critical minerals to market quickly? So that's kind of what I think. One piece that I'd add as well, in addition to that, although the softwood lumber Canada-US dispute dates back a long ways, the other piece that I think that is less well understood in Canada is we're now tied into a much larger debate between the United States and China. And as we can see by all of the events going on in the world today, that's front and center for Americans and in terms of their foreign policy and their foreign economic policy. And it just so happens that the issues that are at the center of the dispute in terms of dumping and that sort of thing go to the heart of the American dispute with China in terms of the use of what they call zeroing in the practice of anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. So that's part of what I would just put there, that as difficult as it's been over the last 35 years to deal with this issue, it's even harder now to find an opportunity for the Americans to find a trade law solution that is specific to Canada without implicating their larger trade law disputes with China.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warner. My apologies, I have to interrupt. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Cripps, for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the invite, and to your committee members as well. Really appreciate the opportunity. So as mentioned, my name is Jason Cripps. I'm the President and CEO of the Alberta Forest Products Association. And I'd first like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Edmonton, which is situated on the traditional territory of the people of Treaty 6, as well as the ancestral land of the Métis. In addition to this, our industry operates on the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaties 7 and 8, and important that we acknowledge the deep and rich partnership that we have with the Indigenous and First Nations community in Métis and our forestry sector. So with respect to softwood lumber in Alberta, one of the things we've seen in our industry is that it contributes to the resiliency of our communities. The Alberta forest products industry is in over 70 Alberta communities. We have an economy in place that booms and busts, and this is well known in Canada with the energy prices. But communities that also have forestry are markedly different. They have the extra layer of insulation, of well-paying jobs that are stable. In fact, our industry contributes over 40,000 jobs to the Alberta economy, many of those in rural Alberta, with an $8 billion economic impact to the province of Alberta. The challenge with trade actions taken by the United States government is that they undermine this economic stability. They create uncertainty and they suck money out of our communities. And it's not just Alberta or Canada that is suffering from the ramification of these actions. It's communities in the United States as well. There are hundreds of thousands of American jobs that are dependent on the transporting, selling, and building with our products. And there are millions of Americans that need housing prices to be affordable in order to afford shelter. The irony of the actions taken by U.S. Commerce is that it's their own citizens that bear the brunt of this impact. We're living right now in times of absolutely serious inflation we haven't seen in decades. Costs both for industry and for our households are growing at an unsustainable rate. The softwood lumber dispute is exacerbating this phenomenon by stifling competition, interfering with supply chains, and contributing to massive spikes in the price of lumber. For our members, tariffs add a significant set of costs that get passed on to the consumers when the markets are strong. But when the market weakens, they contribute to things like mill curtailments and job losses. I've outlined the problem, and now we want to turn to see what some of the solutions are. And as Mark mentioned, unfortunately, there are no silver bullets. No argument that we can make to United States commerce and the U.S. industry that will cause them to lay down the arms in this dispute. To that end, we continue to see value in Canada using the legal challenges like WTO and CUSMA appeals that Mark had mentioned, processing to fight our rights. We also see value in working to educate American consumers about what this dispute is costing them. Finally, we see value in continuing to tell the story about Canada's forests. Our unique legacy of public lands in much of the country means that our very high forest management standards are consistent and that our industry is able to harvest in a way that causes zero deforestation, because harvesting on public lands comes with the obligation to regenerate through activities like replanting. In fact, in 2021, Alberta's forestry industry planted over 100 million trees. That's 3 trees for every 1 harvested in 2021, which we take a lot of pride in. So telling our story will help to promote access to markets around the world and give consumers here at home reassurance that the product they are buying is produced in accordance with world-leading standards. As mentioned previously by Mark, there aren't any huge silver bullets. We need to continue to work both the legal challenges as well as the political challenges. But at the end of the day, unless and until we have a willing dance partner in the U.S. coalition to come to the table, I think we're into this fight for a while. Madam Chair, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cripps. Right on time. Ms. Yurkovich, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. As President of the BC Council of Forest Industries and the Lumber Trade Council, I have the pleasure of representing the majority of forest products manufacturers in BC. These are big and small companies that make up about 50% of our country's lumber and pulp exports, including half of our nation's softwood lumber exports to the U.S. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, and we do appreciate your interest in our industry and in this issue. A bit like Jason, I just want to talk a minute about the industry here. In BC, the forest industry has an economic impact like no other in the provincial economy. It contributes over $13 billion in GDP, about $4 billion annually in taxes and fees that support the healthcare, education, and social services that we all count on. And importantly, direct and indirect and induced jobs are about 100,000 in British Columbia in urban and rural centers. Forest products make up about 1/3 of our exports, 21% of our all traffic through the Port of Vancouver, and 11% of the rail traffic in Western Canada. For us, as an export industry in a small open economy, strong trade relations and diversified markets are critical to our industry's success. And while the U.S. for us continues to be the top destination for BC forest products, over the last 20 years, working in cooperation with government, we've been expanding our markets into Asia, reducing our dependence on the U.S., where we continue to face these unwarranted tariffs, which of course is what we're talking about today. As mentioned, this is a dispute that has long legs. It's been underway for more than 40 years. We sit here in the midst of what we affectionately call Lumber 5. Lumber 3 and 4 were disputes that both ended in Canada's favor with neutral international tribunals, forcing the U.S. Department of Commerce to rescind the unsupported subsidy findings. Now, we're confident that we'll prevail again because Canadian lumber is not subsidized and the claims by the U.S. protectionist producers are baseless. But till it's resolved, this protracted battle continues to consume massive amounts of time, energy, and both human and financial resources. And what's really frustrating and hard for me and many others to understand is the fact that the U.S. needs Canadian softwood so desperately. In 2021, U.S. demand for lumber was 51.6 billion board feet. U.S. domestic producers could only supply 35.6 billion board feet of that, leaving a 16 billion board foot shortfall, of which Canada filled 14 of that 16 billion board feet. U.S. demand for softwood, as mentioned, continues to be strong. And, that's because American families are looking to repair and remodel their homes and in some case build new ones. And we've seen record demand in the last couple of years as people spent more time at home over the pandemic and as housing starts are moving higher after years of underbuilding following the market crash of 2008. And we expect this trend to continue. And that's because a large demographic group are now entering the household formation age bracket. And that's a group that, interesting, is larger than the baby boomers. And they're looking to buy or build their first home. As they do this, as Jason mentioned, they're going to be facing those inflationary pressures, a lot of them caused by the supply chain disruptions of the pandemic. But these pressures are exacerbated by the protectionist tariffs that are driving up prices and putting the dream of home ownership out of reach for some. And more importantly, as mentioned, this dispute creates tremendous volatility and uncertainty in Canada, impacting our workers, our families, and our communities that are supported by the export of softwood lumber. Right now, our markets are strong, but this is a cyclical business. We need to be both prepared for the next down cycle and for the opportunities that are ahead of us. We need to invest and innovate to explore new market opportunities, to train our next generation of workers, to employ technology that enhance sustainable forage management, and to invest in the partnerships with Indigenous nations across our country. And this takes resources, very significant capital. And sadly, right now, there is over $7 billion from Canadian companies that is sitting idle in cash deposits. And that's money that could be used to invest in plant, equipment, workers, and communities. As we look ahead, we see an incredible opportunity to help meet the growing demand for forest products, which are the renewable, low-carbon material of choice, whether you're doing mass timber or fiber-based packaging. And these products are helping to tackle climate change while supporting jobs here at home. We can help supply that from the sustainably managed forest. We can help meet demand, and we can help even the Biden administration as they move to implement their $1 trillion green infrastructure program. So how do we do that? A couple of things. First, we need to resolve this issue. We need the U.S. industry and government to get to the table and negotiate a durable resolution to this dispute. With geopolitical tensions and protectionism high in the U.S., we don't see that opening yet, just like Jason, but with a strong demand and continued supply constraints that may now be exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, there will be opportunities for dialogue in the weeks and months ahead. Until then, we've got to continue to vigorously defend our industry. Second, a Team Canada approach is critical. This is the way it's been for decades. Regardless of who formed government, Canadians have really benefited from the unified voice across party lines. Strong cross-partisan and intergovernmental cooperation has been possible because we share a common cause and because eliminating tariffs are good for everybody. And we really appreciate the Minister Ng and her team, like her predecessors, are continuing with this approach. Third, as a trading nation, we need strong, effective, and efficient trade agreements in place and organizations that are going to help to ensure that they're respected and enforced. This includes upholding the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, having a well-functioning appellant body, and mechanisms that ensure timely resolution to disputes. And
Thank you.
finally,
Yeah.
can I just do one?
Yes, please finish.
Fine. Finally, as we look to the future, we also need to continue with our market and product diversification. BC has led the charge developing overseas markets, and we've done that in partnership with NRCan. And I have to say, the Emerging Market Opportunities Program is a gold star for how to work in partnership and deliver results. But that takes time, and it takes years to develop product familiarity, codes,
Okay,
and
thank you
standards.
very much, Ms. Yorvich. Maybe you can, your last comments can be added on in response to a question
Yep.
from one of the members.
I'm done. That was it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neighbor, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My name is Derek Neiber. I'm President and CEO at Forest Products Association of Canada, and I'm participating today from our FPAC head offices here in Ottawa, built on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. Canada's forest sector is a $76 billion sector. It brings over $34 billion worth of sustainably sourced Canadian products to the world each year. We're across more than 600 forest-dependent communities across the country and directly employ just under 230,000 Canadians. I know a number of members of the committee. I see MP Sheehan and Martel and Massey and Hoback who know us pretty well, but for those of you who don't, we're a world leader and unique in many ways in our approach to sustainable forest management. I have the privilege of chairing my global colleagues from 28 countries around the world. And one of our big differentiators in Canada is our public land component. Over 90% of the lands that forest operations in Canada happen on are under the purview of provincial government laws, regulations, and policies. So operating on provincial crown land brings with it significant obligations and commitments to use local science, secure input from Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, make sure these local values are incorporated, and also manage for dozens of important values from biodiversity conservation to flood and fire risk mitigation and supporting birds, mammals, and fish that call the forest home. Plans are developed on the land base considering 1 to 200 year time horizons. Not many industries plan in those cycles. And as I said, those plans on public land are approved by provincial governments. Our sector sees a lot of alignment with the federal government's priorities and ready-made solutions, as Susan and Jason spoke to help decarbonize our economy, to support effective conservation, to sustain and create good-paying jobs in rural and northern Canada especially, and to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And in terms of Indigenous peoples and their engagement, those communities are core to the success and the future of our sector. Not only the Indigenous youth who are representing that significant cohort in terms of talent of the future. But today, Indigenous peoples also directly control 10% of Canada's wood supply, and that continues to trend upward. There's also numerous joint ventures, co-management arrangements, employment programs, and revenue sharing agreements with Indigenous communities across the country, not to mention over 12,000 Indigenous workers and over 1,400 Indigenous-owned forestry businesses operating from coast to coast. As Susan alluded to the net zero carbon economy opportunity, there's no path to net zero, as Jim Carr used to say when he was minister. There's no path to net zero carbon without Canadian forestry and forest products. Our solutions are across the value chain, and they include everything from mitigating fire risks that are carbon spewing to producing lumber and wood products that lock in carbon for generations, and then also using what would otherwise be wood waste, whether it be sawdust or bark or wood chips, to make things like paper, biofuels, bioplastics, and power electricity grids and district heating systems. We're pretty blessed in Canada, over 9,000 trees for every Canadian, and Jason talked about that 3-to-1 planting ratio in Alberta. That replacing more than what we take ensures that we're going to keep our forests as forests forever. So there's been a lot of talk today about softwood lumber, and I'm going to talk about another trade issue that's facing our lumber sector and our pulp and paper sector. And it's something I think this committee and the Government of Canada needs to be clearly aware of, and the potential impacts of this. And that is discriminatory pieces of anti-Canadian forestry legislation that are currently active on the floors of the state legislatures in California and New York. These are designed to restrict Canadian forest exports to those states through state procurement channels. When I took this job a few years ago, I didn't anticipate needing to do advocacy work in Sacramento and Albany, but here we we are. And as I said, if these bills were to pass, the precedent-setting nature and what some of the activists would do to try to influence U.S.-based customers, other state governments would be disastrous for Canadian forestry families and communities. So just to give you a little bit of specifics here, over the past year, we've been working in collaboration with industry, labor, and Indigenous partners against bills in California by Assembly Member Kalra. One bill which was vetoed by Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, only to be reintroduced weeks ago, and a bill by Assembly Member Liz Kruger in New York State. When we saw the bills emerge, one right after the other, with very similar language, we knew there was some kind of coordinated effort, and it's become clear to us that the U.S.-based anti-Canadian resource organization, Natural Resources Defense Council, has been instrumental in drafting these bills. So I want to raise these bills. We're very, very concerned about the potential impacts on our workforce, on our ability to operate on the land, and the discriminatory nature has clearly been called out by industry and labor partners, and we need the federal government to stand with us in ensuring that we don't have even more trade problems with our neighbors to the south. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much for that extra information. It's very much appreciated. Mr. Samry, please, for 5 minutes.
Yes, merci, Madame la Présidente, Madame, Messieurs les députés.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, I am Jean-François Samry. I'm the President and CEO of the Quebec Forest Industry Council, here with Mr. Michel Vincent, our Chief Economist. Our association is the principal voice of the Quebec forest industry, representing the interests of Quebec softwood and hardwood sawmills, veneer mills, pulp, paper, board and panel companies, and engineered wood manufacturers. We work with government, other forestry stakeholders, and the general public, promoting our members' contribution to socioeconomic development, responsible use of resources, sustainable management, and ecological products. As to the subject discussed today, we support and represent our members in the various disputes underway and advise as government on approaches to ensure fair softwood lumber trade with the U.S. Contributions to the economies of Canada and Quebec is considerable. Let's remind ourselves that forests and forestry play an important role in Canada. The forestry sector provides direct employment to more than 230,000 Canadians in 600 communities, of which more than 12,000 are First Nations workers. It generates nearly $8 billion in revenue annually. In Quebec, the industry supports over 140,000 jobs and generates over $20 billion in sales. We're a world leader in the production of many forest products and exported in 2019 $33 billion worth of forest products, about $10 billion from Quebec. This figure has been rising sharply since then due to strong demand for wood in construction and renovation projects. Besides having economic weight, our forests are a powerful tool to address climate change. Giant reservoirs, capturing and sequestering CO2. Our forests help us fight global warming. Through its procurement policies, the Government of Canada can play a leadership role in accelerating the use of wood. Trade disputes with the United States. Well, softwood lumber exports to that country are extremely important to Canada, a strategic part of our industry's operations. Softwood lumber trade disputes go back to 1981, well before the 1994 trade agreement came into effect. Caving into the protectionist demands of private forest owners and U.S. mills, the U.S. Department of Commerce has methodically filed complaints against Canada whenever softwood lumber trade agreements have expired for decades now. To date, international tribunals have never found Canada to be subsidizing its industry or causing injury to the U.S. The recent voluminous and unanimous World Trade Organization ruling continues this tradition. However, unilateral U.S. trade measures are currently hurting U.S. citizens by increasing the price of products that they buy, and also hurting Canadian consumers who must live with the price increases as these prices are set on a continental basis. Tariffs are being imposed despite housing and lumber overheating in the market, with American producers struggling to meet 70% of their local demand. So why such measures? To provide U.S. producers with an economic environment that encourages investment in the United States, says the U.S. coalition in its legal depositions, yet this same coalition states and publicly that its members do not intend to produce a single extra foot of board to meet local demand. If that's the case, what hope do these tariff measures offer American or Canadian consumers? In truth, these duties, these tariffs imposed on Canadian lumber serve only to increase the profits of U.S. lumber producers. Full stop. The National Home Builder Association keeps reminding American elected officials of this in the U.S. Congress. These unjustified trade measures on softwood lumber artificially inflate price. This in turn fuels inflation across many products. At present, the U.S. DOC tariffs imposed on Canadian exports are raising the price of every 2x4 by U.S. $1.20. U.S. producers who do not pay these duties simply pocket that price increase in the U.S. The U.S. administration may well talk Made in America, Build Back Better, but without Canadian lumber, they're not going to make it. Without the presence of Canadian wood completely free of countervailing duties, Biden will not be able to make any headway in his fight against inflation. Retaliatory measures against the Russian economy applied by Western countries add to the problem by reducing the volume of European timber in North America. Reduced supply combined with strong demand will push up the price of this strategic building material. By caving in to U.S. domestic producers, the Biden administration is making homes less affordable for American citizens, fueling rising inflation and quietly killing the American dream. That's not what we want for our American friends and neighbors. Our association and other associations in Canada, others have pointed it out, believe in a Team Canada approach as the best way to resolve this dispute with our largest trading partner. Our forestry industry, provinces, and relevant stakeholders must be consulted on the best course of action to end this dispute. Together, we need to tell our American friends that there is a better way to trade in softwood lumber. We need to help the U.S. administration push back against the small but influential softwood lumber lobby that exists in a few states.
The time is up.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bay?
Oui, bonjour, je vous remercie. Alors,
Yes, hello, and thank you. I'm Sylvain Lopé, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Quebec Wood Export Bureau, which is an association of manufacturers who export wood in the softwood and hardwood sectors. Today, I will discuss softwood and the current effect of war and sanctions in Ukraine and Russia on our products, and then I will recommend some ways forward. You have all seen what we're seeing in the media, the war between Russia and now Belarus, or the Belarus area, and Ukraine. Russia represented 1/3 of exports of softwood until recently, 50% into China and the rest to Europe, mostly to Europe. All this came to an end with the new sanctions. So we are starting to see the effect of this on market areas. Europe will no longer receive around 8 million cubic meters of wood from Russia, so they will repatriate what they do export to the United States, which is about 4 million cubic meters. There will nevertheless still be a deficit in Europe. There will be more demand than supply. China now, we're not quite sure. The geopolitics of it all are shifting, but it's quite clear that the Chinese will likely purchase what's left of Russian wood, still available from Russia. At what price? Certainly less than the current market price, and there will be some sort of adaptation period over which this will be setting in, and this will reduce our ability to sell our wood in China. So we'll keep the wood in Canada. We have a deficit as well, given that we will be losing the wood from Europe that we usually receive. So overall, they will have about 1.5 million less cubic feet of wood supplied in North America, which will put pressure upward on prices over the years to come. even more so than we're seeing already. So link that to the price of oil and the price of real estate, and it's going to be quite an inflationary effect. We're trying to look into the future. Will the Russians be back on the market? The Russians are nationalizing production now before anyone reinvests in Russia to get softwood back up and produced for the rest of the world. I think it's going to be decades. So it's a crisis. There are two important factors for Russians: food and shelter. And it's important not only for Russians, but for all of us, including in America. It's a big issue even in the United States. Many people don't have shelter. So my first recommendation is that we work with our American counterparts. Given the crisis in the supply of softwood and the housing crisis that they're facing, they really should drop any tariffs. You know, when you're in a crisis, and if your house is burning down, you really should not be taxing water supplies and firemen, firewomen. And this is good timing. This would be the time to put it that way to the Americans. Secondly, this is something that we've been living with for 40 years. We need to diversify, and this is somewhat what Susan was saying earlier. We need to diversify our markets to ensure that we do not depend solely on the American market. There are two ways of going about this. Either we sell our 2x4s elsewhere in the United States, or we transform our wood to add value, creating structural panel or mass timber, solid wood, things that can be used to build with. It'll be a little bit difficult to work on the Chinese market, at least in the immediate future, but we do need to keep that door open, given that this crisis could shift wildly over the next couple of years. Perhaps everything will get back somewhat to normal, and they'll be trying to reconstruct the entire area around Ukraine, not just in Ukraine. There we might have a recession, further inflation that would totally pull things around. We can't depend on the American market, in brief. We also need to continue investing in processing, secondary products, value-added products. When we process our wood, we up its value by about 4 or 5 times, and that is relevant for us. That is a good value-added approach. Moreover, we need to change our production methods. They're somewhat archaic.
Mr. Lebay, we have to move on to our members, and starting with Mr. Martel for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci à tous les intervenants.
Thank you to all. My question is for Mr. Summery. Before discussing the challenges surrounding exports to the United States, I would like to know a little bit more about the state of forestry in Canada, specifically the federal policy on forest caribou. Is that a concern for your members? Very good question. Well, you've heard my colleagues speak about the state of the forestry sector in Canada, and it's in good shape. We've, of course, run into challenges. In BC, for example, the floods. But now that we're no longer facing down a CP strike, I think things look good. Stability is good. We need to know what to look forward to in order to invest and prepare future competitivity. That's essential. As Mr. Neiber pointed out, this is the sort of sector where we're looking ahead a good century. Planting is for the future, over the next 100 years. So it's a sector that needs a long view forward. We need to be sure that the situations will be stable for decades to come. So the caribou, it's an unresolved issue, so it makes things less predictable for us. Of course, everyone will tell you that there are areas that should be protected in Canada. There's room for that, but we also need to ensure that in some areas production will become more intense. We just need to understand where we're doing what in order to ensure that we continue to grow economically and meet the needs of Canadians and Americans. I think that's a fundamental premise. We, of course, need conservation, but we also need production. Mr. Samre, so this is a matter of some concern, the caribou, for your members? Well, yes, indeed. Our members are worried about the survival of the caribou, and some have been very proactive in moving out of some areas, compensating for that. All of these are certified businesses, and thus are required to ensure that they protect wildlife and cohabit with wildlife, so to speak. Mr. Samre, what do we need to do to ensure that Canadians don't pay so much for their 2x4s? If we go ahead with some restrictions on felling to protect the caribou, I guess that would bring up the price, no? So is this an issue affecting our international capacity to produce and to compete? Well, our wood is sold on the North American market. The tariff slapped on by the Americans directly influences the prices paid by Canadians. What we do need to do, first and foremost, is solve this dispute to disinflate, to bring down inflationary pressure on 2x4s sold all over North America in order to be able to supply more wood to consumers everywhere. We will, of course, also need conservation areas for the caribou, for other wildlife, but we do need to tell the sector very clearly that there will be, as well, long-term protected zones for production for the sector, and that's essential as well. Mr. Samre, though, up until now, how frequently has the Canadian government consulted Canada's forestry sector and other interested parties about the current dispute? Well, I could turn to my colleagues to see what they have to say, but I can tell you that since I've been here for 18 months, and I'm sure that others have been here for longer than that in this sector, we have had a couple of meetings with the minister, working meetings to start working out the details of a Teams Canada approach. Derek, perhaps anyone else who's been there for a while, be my guest. Yes. My next question is indeed for Mr. Labbé. How could Canada better support exports of forestry products? Perhaps speaking to diversification that you touched on in your presentation. Well, there are 2 points here. We do have a program up and running with the federal government called the EMO, Expanding Market Opportunities, Emerging Market Opportunities Program, which should be renewed soon. There are 2 important aspects of that program: diversification and developing new products for sale in the USA or elsewhere. I can tell you we've had 2 difficult years. The effect on pricing has been real. It will be difficult to export. We'll do what we can, of course, to continue to supply Canada and the United States. That said, we need to keep our doors open to other markets. So this is important programming. Thank you, Mr. Labbé. I think this brings my time to an end.
Okay. On to Mr. Barani for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for this very helpful testimony in terms of where we're at the current situation. And just in response to Monsieur Martel, I can inform the committee that the Minister was at a round table with members of the softwood lumber industry as recently as January 13th. I'm going to ask a question to Ms. Yurkovich, because you mentioned the importance of a Team Canada approach. And I think that's critical in terms of what the Minister has been doing, along with the Prime Minister and Minister Wilkinson, is raising this issue at as many instances as possible. So in terms of Team Canada, Minister Ng was accompanied by some members of this committee from opposition parties in Washington in December, raising this issue. She also, during that trip, met with the National Association of Home Builders, which was referenced by several of the witnesses in terms of their testimony. And Minister Wilkinson has also been engaging his provincial and territorial counterparts. And at the North American Leaders Summit in November, the Prime Minister engaged on this issue directly with Joe Biden. So I guess the question I have for you, Ms. Yurkovich, is that we are where we are. We're sensing a bit of intransigence on the part of the Americans to reopen this. Do you have any creative solutions as to how we could influence them in terms of making this a priority for reopening and getting back to the negotiating table, given that we all believe, as does Minister Ng, that a negotiated solution is in the best interest of Canada? So over to you, Ms. Yurkovich.
Yes, intransigent is one word for it. So, look, I think I am pleased with, government has raised, I know that government has raised this, and governments before of all stripes have been working on this file. And I really do believe, as some of my other colleagues said, that the Team Canada approach is the only way to go forward. And I think, currently the minister is employing that same kind of approach, and I think that's really important. Unfortunately, the difficult thing about this file is if the government of Canada went to the table, they could actually bind this industry here in Canada. That's not the case in the U.S. I think Mr. Warner talked about the trade laws being used, and I think the trade laws are used. They are what they are, and the U.S. industry uses their trade laws against their competitors. And so, the difficult part of this file is even if the U.S. government comes to the table, if you don't have the U.S. industry there, which is protectionist by nature, then you can't get an agreement. And that's the really challenging thing, because what we need under their system is we need those companies to say they are not being injured, which of course, when we got to the last agreement in 2006, that's what occurred. You need a certain percentage of those companies to say they're not being injured. So while the U.S. industry doesn't have a veto per se, they effectively have a veto, and it makes it very difficult. So I really do understand the government's effort and appreciate the government's efforts, as governments before have tried to raise this issue. I do think that there are some things that are really important. We've talked about here affordability. We've talked about, green building. I think those things are really important to the government of Canada, governments across the country, frankly. They are also important to the Biden administration, and I think we can push on those. They are making things less affordable, and they're allowing their industry to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Yurkovich. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, particularly on the sort of synergies on green infrastructure and building greener in both countries. That's a priority for both of us. So that should be hopefully persuasive. I want to ask you about, we know where we are, and we know that we've actually deployed a number of tools under a number of different mechanisms to challenge decisions that have been taken. And we've been successful at every turn. Sometimes those decisions take time, and some of them are still pending. So at the WTO, there's a total of 3 that are pending right now. Under the old NAFTA Chapter 19, there's 3 instances of litigation that are still pending. And under CUSMA Chapter 10, there's 4 instances of decisions that are pending. I know it's not the ideal situation, because we'd like to not be in litigation, but I guess I'm conscious of the fact that when we were brought into renegotiating NAFTA and turning it into CUSMA, we heard a lot from parties in the chamber, including Her Majesty's official opposition, about resiling from things like imposing a strong dispute resolution mechanism. And that mechanism is actually clearly in play, given that there's 4, no less than 4 disputes currently at play under CUSMA Chapter 10 right now. So if you could let us know, and perhaps I'll ask this question to Mr. Cripps, if you could just let us know where you think we'd be if we didn't have a dispute settlement mechanism under CUSMA in order through which to litigate some of these disputes. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We certainly very much wholeheartedly believe in dispute mechanisms that are out there. I think the importance is to make sure that we continue to encourage both sides of the table to have panels, members being appointed to those. We want to make sure that those panels are used in good faith. And in order to have those done in good faith, we need the appointments to continue and for the cadence of those panels to increase. But wholeheartedly agree, whether it was under NAFTA or now under CUSMA, the panel mechanisms vitally important for us to have one of those tools in the toolbox to continue to pursue the parties to get back to the table to negotiate.
Thank you. In the brief time I have left, if I could ask a question of Mr. Nybor. You'd mentioned the aspect of sort of the overall economic value of the industry, but you also mentioned Indigenous ownership, Indigenous entrepreneurs, Indigenous employees. I know that we are funding the softwood lumber industry to the tune of about $251 million over a span of 3 years, and some of that includes money for the Indigenous Forestry Initiative to the tune of $12.6 million. Do efforts like that help you in terms of the work you're doing on advancing reconciliation?
Yeah, definitely. Those dollars go directly to those Indigenous communities and those Indigenous businesses, and that's the way it should be. We hope that the Indigenous Forestry Initiative is renewed in the upcoming budget. I think that's part of a suite of very beneficial products that support our sector. And I think the other important thing to realize, and I come at this from a national perspective, so I'm seeing activity in all the provinces, but it's so critical that our companies on the ground are working and respecting the wishes and values of those local Indigenous communities, because some communities want to plant trees, some want to run the log yard, some might just want revenue sharing, some might want a significant employment program. So I think what's really, really important is there's no one size fits all in terms of it needs to be up to those local communities, and that discussion, those decisions need to be made at that local community level.
Thank you very much. On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good day to colleagues and witnesses. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Samary, you explained the ecological potential of forestry, carbon capture, and so on. I think this is known to all. We're often hearing that the Amazon forest is the lungs of the planet. Could you tell us more about the potential ecologically of using wood as a construction material? Yes, many reports say that we need to plant more trees and really increase our afforestation across Canada, which we are doing, but also use more wood in our construction. Every cubic meter of solid wood imprisons 1 ton of greenhouse gases. So it's an important material to use in that way. It's essential for greening the economy. Thank you for telling us that. I think when it comes to ecological materials, wood is one of them. Wood means oxygen, and there are many studies saying and showing that people are happier when they live in wood structures. Moreover, I'd like to point out that support of the petrol industry is very high, but not that much help is given to forestry. Look, I certainly don't want to speak to the oil and gas sector, but what my colleagues have also pointed out is that programming is needed to ensure the modernization and ongoing competitivity of our sector, converting pulp and paper into new products so that we stop using so much plastic, for example. There's the iFit program, $50 million over 2 years, but we need a good deal more than that, not 50 million, but 500 million, because there's a serious level of demand in this area. New products must be developed to meet the demand, and we need programming sufficient to the task to help Canada become a leader in this area. For example, we lack budgeting to support conversion. As Ms. Labbé pointed out, and others as well, supporting export programming is also essential. Thank you for that. Another quick question, yes or no, please. Is it true that the Quebec forestry pricing set by the market has been changed recently so that it would fit in with trade agreements? Yes, this was recognized by the World Trade Organization judgment. And the Parliamentary Secretary was mentioning that the free trade agreement with the U.S. might be renegotiated. Do you think that should be pointed out in the agreement? I can say that if it's all that's missing to get to an agreement, I think that in Quebec we're ready to consider that. Having a system within a commercial situation that's really so tariff heavy with so little access to the market, well, we would be ready to adjust. Recently, we've seen that in other areas, tariffs have been eliminated. Some foreign producers importing into the USA have seen their tariffs eliminated. So this might happen. All said and done, the United States is being found off-board by the International World Trade Organization and other organizations, but we need to be able to sit down and talk about it all. Is that correct? As other witnesses have pointed out, we do need dialogue, but the American coalition does have a heavy weight, you know, it's kind of almost a veto. Nevertheless, the U.S. administration may considerably reduce tariffs on wood, 22, 23%. Well, it might decide on 1% or 0.5%. Why not? The administration, the Biden administration, has, you know, some weight in this matter. Yes, indeed, everyone can get involved. Over and above the interests of U.S. producers, we must consider citizens and their need for housing, families, young couples. Everyone would prefer having access to Canadian and Quebec wood at a reasonable price. Sure, this would be good for everyone. What's at issue is being able to find a way to ensure that the coalition also gets on board, because without their waiver, if you wish, their approval, the U.S. government is not going to be able to carry through on, on a good negotiation with Canada. That is in their interests, though. It's in the interests of Americans that they do so. I can see that I'm running out of time.
Thank you. On to Ms. Cirillo for 6 minutes, please. Welcome to the committee today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm here for Brian Massey today from the riding of Port Moody Coquitlam. And I'll acknowledge as well that it's on the unceded and traditional territory of the Coquitlam. And I also wanted to share with the committee and for the French Canadians or the Quebec Canadians here today that at one time in the early 1900s, it was considered, or it was, the largest lumber mill in Canada and the second largest lumber mill in the world, the Fraser Mill, which was populated by Quebecers moving west, and also for the East Indian community, the Chinese community, and the Japanese community. So Fraser Mills is now under a rebuild as the area Fraser Mills for residential housing and industry, no longer a mill, but I wanted to recognize the history of the riding. My first question is for Ms. Yurkovich, and it's just around the points that you laid out that need to be addressed. And I just wanted to ask around targets or metrics in relation to the fact that we're not at a point where we have an agreement. Do targets or metrics exist outside of agreements as negotiations go on?
I'm not really sure about metrics per se. I mean, certainly what we do, certainly the U.S. is looking at market share, and they're looking at whether the share of Canadian lumber coming across the border is growing or not. And I would say that, we've seen demand in the U.S. grow quite substantially over the last few years. The U.S. industry has put on 5 billion board feet more of lumber. The trouble is they can't catch up. We have consistently had a gap of about 14 to 15 billion board feet. It was 16 last year because lumber demand was so high. So we certainly are watching that. In terms of, the metrics for when would we get back to the table, I don't think there's metrics, but there's a couple of things. I've been around this business for about 25 years. It's not my first rodeo. I was around when we were in other negotiations. And, it's usually, we've had a number of litigation processes under our belt. Usually with some wins, like the WTO. We had a terrific win with the WTO last year. Trouble is, you can't appeal it to anyone because the U.S. won't appoint their folks to the appellant body. So usually there's a few litigation. There's a little litigation water under the bridge. There's usually a number of dollars on deposit. Last time it was $5 billion. This time it's already at $7 billion. So that certainly is something that, in my experience, is when we get back to the table. And then there's something else, and it's the something else. It's usually, you know, it was mentioned by someone that lumber isn't really the top priority for the U.S. And certainly right now in the post-pandemic world and with, you know, geopolitical instability, it won't be the top of their list, but they'll want something else. And so it becomes a matter of negotiation. So in my experience, those are kind of the three things that have to be there. And ultimately, when we get a deal, and we've got a deal in the past, it means the leader of Canada and the leader of the U.S. kind of get together and say, we're going to get this resolved. We just haven't seen that yet.
Thank you. And my next question will be for Mr. Warner. I'm going to take advantage of some history here, if you don't mind. I just wanted to ask, historically, were First Nations involved in the creation of the trade agreements, and have they been involved in any negotiations going forward to resolve any of the current disputes?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't think so. I think that there have been consultations as part of the context in the last round. I think there was consultations with First Nations, but I can't say going back to the original Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement back in 1987, whatever it is, or NAFTA back in 1993, that there was any formal type consultations with Indigenous communities. I'm not sure, you know, whether that would. I just don't think we were at that stage yet in terms of that politics or in the politics of various trade agreements. So I guess the short answer is probably not.
And going forward, Mr. Warner, do you think there's an opportunity for just a different approach in relations to having nations at the table, or even doing some of that negotiation?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this, I've worn many different trade hats in my life, and one of them was also working at the OECD in Paris and watching Canada negotiate there and at the WTO. Look, for most trading partners of Canada, I hate to tell you the truth here, is that Canada is an annoying country to negotiate with, because they already have a hard enough time negotiating with the provinces and the federal government. And every time anyone sits down with Canada and they want to talk about something they want to do, the first thing Canada says, it's in the provincial jurisdiction. We can't. So that's the problem. So if you add on Indigenous communities, I think you'll just make it even more complicated, to be very honest with you. It's hard enough now, but I definitely think there are creative ways where you could build more consultation mechanisms into it. I just don't know how that would play out, whether that would make it easier or not. I mean, it seems to me the issue here is large corporations on the American side who have an interest in negotiating a certain way, and trade laws that work for them, and American congressmen and women who are elected every 2 years, you know, and they answer to their constituents. So I don't see that force is going to change very quickly.
Thank you. And if I've got another minute, or am I done?
50 seconds.
Okay. Mr. Cripps wanted to ask you about stability in workers. So I'm wondering if there's anything that the government could say differently, do differently at this point to stand up for workers and to bring some stability through these difficult times to your communities.
Well, maybe just approach this at the macro level, is to really encourage workers to recognize forestry sector as a key economic driver, key environmental driver, and that is actually a great industry to be a part of. It is a sustainable industry. It is actually the top-end renewable industry, and so just to encourage workers to look at a career in forestry, because it encompasses everything that we're looking for and trying to be as a country on a renewable side of things.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gray, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Ms. Yurkovich, it's good to see you again. And so my first questions are for you. You had mentioned in your testimony that you've been around during previous negotiations over the last 25 years, and during the 2006 softwood lumber negotiations and then the extension in 2012 going to 2015. What lessons do you think can be applied now?
That's a really good question. You know, we have tried all kinds of things over the years. And I think the one thing that was raised by, I can't remember who raised it, but it's, you know, this has really been a producer issue in the U.S. where the producers have a lot of power and the consumers don't seem to have a lot of power in this discussion when they actually are the ones that kind of bear the brunt of it. I would say in the early 2000s, we really tried to engage with the consumer side in the U.S. and it was very difficult because at that time, lumber prices were really a relatively small portion of a house being built, et cetera, because prices were very low. Now I think that is different. And I think that one thing I would learn is one thing that I think we should be thinking about is how do we really engage with in a broader way with the consumer lobby in the US and with consumers to let them know what their producers are, which are their American friends and neighbors are doing to actually push many of them out of home ownership territory. So I think that's something that, and the federal government led that initiative at the time, working with industry. And I think that's one of the learnings that I have that I think we would maybe consider. And I also think we have to look for areas that are maybe not specifically lumber related that might be levers in this discussion with the Biden administration.
Great, thank you. Now, would you say, Ms. Yurkovich, that the lack of a softwood lumber agreement is contributing to inflation?
Well, for sure, it is inflated because when you're paying tariffs, what happens is those tariffs get priced into the it's a commodity market, it's a North American market, and that gets priced into lumber. So it is having an inflationary effect. And of course, we were under the first administrative review paying 20-ish%. The rates now are a bit lower, but we're already in administrative review number 4. And so we will have different rates again. Well, we'll have a different rate in August. So it definitely adds to the price of lumber. And I think, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on pricing right now, largely because of supply chain issues that are not unique to our industry. But certainly this is really something that exacerbates it and is totally unnecessary.
Great, thank you. And actually, just to tag on to your supply chain issues, would you say that, have you heard of any supply chain issues or shipping issues that might be related to the vaccine mandates that we have at the border with the U.S. With truckers?
Well, certainly when there was all of the action and the borders were closed to traffic, that's not helpful. And I guess I would say, it's not helpful given what year we have had. We've had fires, we've had floods, we've had tremendous disruptions in our supply chain, and we are an export industry in an export-driven province. So it's critically important that we get our products to market. And so, the flow of that product over the border by truck, by rail, and of course containers is critically important. That wasn't sort of the biggest interruption. The bigger interruptions have come from number one, the natural disasters, but just the disruption of the supply chain as a whole and the inability to get to containers to take our product to market.
Great, thank you. Now, we know just how important the softwood lumber industry is for those of us in BC and all the jobs that rely on it. Would you be able to touch on the impacts the lack of a softwood lumber agreement since the end of 2015, which was 7 years ago, has had on your members? And has it resulted in some lost potential in expansion of our softwood lumber industry and in jobs in British Columbia?
Well, for sure. I mean, prices are very high right now, so the industry is doing okay, but we don't have to look back very far. In 2019, there were 144 curtailment announcements in the province of British Columbia alone. Because we are a high-cost environment, and that had a massive impact. We have declining fiber supply because of our beetle issues of 20 years ago, and so that was creating a ton of disruption. And when you add on the instability created by not having an agreement in place, that's very difficult for planning purposes. Duties can go from 10 or 20, 15, 20%. In some cases, some companies are paying up of 30. When you have that kind of instability, it doesn't allow you to plan. And I would say the other thing is $7 billion plus. More than $7 billion is on the sidelines. And that is money that could be spent in British Columbia and indeed across the country, investing in workers and communities and transforming industry and applying technology. And that is a real loss for our country.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Mio for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I start my question, I'd like to have this on the record. Our government have included indigenous group and their voice during our renegotiation on CUSMA. And according to Statistic Canada in 2021, British Columbia, Quebec, Alberta, and Ontario exported the highest value of softwood lumber product to the United States, up over 30% since the same time of reporting in 2020. I'd like to address the following question to Ms. Yurkovich. Considering in 2021, many of Canada's largest softwood lumber markets saw record high export to the United States. What can the high value of trade be attributed to?
So there's a difference between volume and value. So the actual volumes that have shipped over the border are up slightly between 2020 and 2021. But it's the value, because of course we've seen prices that in 25 years, I would say anybody who's been in the business has never seen prices like we have seen right now. And that's because we had a massive disruption in 2020. You know, the whole world shut down, everybody stayed home. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to do projects and move farther away. And now with telecommuting, people can live farther away. So we've had tremendous demand. And so the value has gone up very significantly, but the volume is up only slightly. And I have those numbers, which I'm happy to share with the clerk of the committee after. I can send you the chart to look at both the volume and the value of trade over the last few years.
Thank you. That value will be very appreciated. And to date, what have been the domestic impact of United States' current application of tariff on certain Canadian softwood lumber product, and how do those impact vary across province and community?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think Ms. Gray asked that question as well, like what are the impacts? It creates uncertainty. It takes money out of the industry that could be spent on plant and equipment. And it's destabilizing, because if you don't know what your the duty rates move around because of the administrative review process. And so it's very hard to plan. And of course, you know, in different parts of the country, I would say, you know, Jean-Francois, you might want to speak. I mean, duties are higher with some of the mandatory respondent companies than they are with others. And that's destabilizing across the country. So, you know, there are a lot of impacts, in addition to the fact that it creates price inflation, not just for U.S. consumers, but because it's a North American market, for Canadian consumers as well. Jean-Francois, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Mrs. President, I would ask our chief economist to fully answer the question. Your mic, Michel.
Sorry. Yes, Susan is right. Mandatory respondents have their own rate after each administrative review. So we have one company here in the eastern part of Canada that has a huge rate, and the rest of the industry, the two other respondents are located in British Columbia. They have also their own rate, and the whole of the industry, the rest of the industry, which is the vast majority of companies, have their what we call the all others rate. Basically, that's the way it's working.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. And to follow up further, considering U.S. import Canadian softwood lumber are at record high, how have the current application of tariff by the United States impact the United States' own softwood lumber industry? Open to all.
Did you want me to answer that, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I think we've had strong demand in the U.S. and we see demand being strong going forward. And so what you're seeing is U.S. producers are putting more capacity online. They're building more sawmills, but that takes time. And so, as I mentioned in my remarks, there's about a 16 billion board foot gap in 2021. So that means they're underproducing. They're not able to meet their own customers' demand in the U.S. And so they're looking to us. So they are increasing their supply. For sure, but they're not doing it fast enough. And so with keeping these tariffs on, they do benefit from those tariffs because, of course, they get higher prices and they're bringing production on slowly. So that keeps, it's the laws of supply and demand. If we don't have enough supply, there's price pressure.
Okay. Thank you very much. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Vaisseau, economist for the Quebec Forest Industry Council, please tell me, have you considered a scenario involving further and, let's say, sufficient investments to support transformation? Would this help the sector breathe more easily in the context of these commercial problems, these trade problems? Yes, indeed, obviously. If only to reduce Canada's reliance on the processing that takes place in the United States. So investing in that sort of processing and that transformation, value-added transformation here in Canada would be one way to protect ourselves. We saw in 2006 when a good deal of revenue, a lot of the deposits that had built up were returned to companies. We saw a wave of investment in favor of transformation across Canada. That's the investments that are very needed, badly needed, in the mills industry, mills sector, sawmill sector. Definitely, these sums are necessary. Given the current context, of course, people aren't tending to invest. Firms aren't investing. So you think that public investment in this sector might build up the sector, while private investments, business investments, corporate investment, programming that now exists can stimulate it. There is some already existing, 500 million can, an assistance program, 500 million worth can become a 500 or even $1 billion in investments once it gets underway and encourages investments, the corporate investment. Most of the investment in the forestry sector is private, of course. Thank you very much.
1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I guess, Mr. Nybor, I'm going to ask you a question around workers. We're talking today about Team Canada response, but I'm hearing regional differences. So my question is, how do these differences affect compensation and stability for workers and their mobility to move and live and find work across Canada?
Yeah, a couple things on the work front. The area where we're seeing the biggest pressure point is on trucker shortages. We have about 23,000 trucker positions short, and that's been extremely challenging, especially during the scare with the CP work stoppage and the fact that we have a number of mills not running right now because they can't get CN rail cars. So the transportation supply chain pressure point is a real one. I would say there are very much regional differences. I think what we've observed is when the oil and gas sector in places like northern Alberta hit a tough period of time, that freed up some labor for us. They were in adjacent communities and were able to come over. I think of some other communities where mines might be booming, and at that point in time, the dollars might be more lucrative there. We have some pressure points in terms of losing staff there. We're really very much in most parts of the country a northern and more rural industry. Recruiting people to those more rural and remote areas can be challenging, but if you look at and I could send through the clerk some of the numbers in terms of average wages across the board, but better than average family supporting multi-generational jobs in our sector. One of the biggest gaps we do have is continuing to be able to get those bodies to get into rural and northern Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Nybor. And I'm going to ask a similar question to Mr. Labbé just around...
40 seconds remaining.
Okay. Just around workers and just the mobility and the ability to move in and out of province. Is that possible with the way the forestry sector is right now?
Yeah, but I think the problem actually in Canada, it's not necessarily the mobility, but the lack of workers. I think that's a big problem that we face now. And for the commodity that are located far away from the city centers, that it's even tougher. So I don't know what the program that we can involve regarding workers from abroad, or maybe bringing Ukrainians. That would be a good timing. But also there's a more sustainable solution is more robotization of factories, like less workers producing more. So that's what we are developing in this value-added industry. That's the only way to build to build more capacity with the same workers.
Thank you very much, Mr. LeVay. On to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. I want to follow up with Mr. Nybor and some of his comments from earlier, and when he mentioned specifically that when he took his position, he never thought he would be in a position of having to lobby state legislatures such as California and New York State, and some of the pieces of legislation that had been brought forward. And you even indicated that you thought they were some kind of coordination, and in a sense, some of them are very similar in a sense. My concern from one aspect is, and maybe get your comments, is, you know, through the adjudication process, we've been successful through, you know, WTO and NAFTA and so on. But these actions taken through the states, is the federal government, is the government able to take actions to rectify those type of injurious type of pieces of legislation? Also, I mean, can you see this type of actions being expanded to other states? And if so, are you now looking at doing any type of analysis on our job sectors and what it would impact on jobs and, you know, and our industry as a whole?
I really appreciate the question, because this is a very frustrating one. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I chair a global group from 28 countries around the world. I know how we stack up in Canada. And it's about, you know, what kind of products or materials do we want to build with, and where do we want to get those materials from? Do you want to get them from Thunder Bay or Prince George or Whitecourt, or do you want to get them from the Amazon or 8 hours outside of Moscow? And this is where we are on the global, and these are the questions we're asking legislators. And it's, you know, what we would like to see, and what should be happening, is recognizing that any forest product coming from Canada has, you know, as you know, over 90% of the lands are under provincial purview. They've been approved by provincial governments. On top of that, we've got 40% of the world's third-party certified forests here in Canada. You know, that's another threshold above and beyond. So we're seeing, you know, to your question, where the federal government can help us, we've got, it's through diplomacy. The trade offices of the provinces are very engaged in provinces like BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, who are the 4 provinces that are at risk the greatest in those 2 states. Our Global Affairs Canada officials on the ground are engaged, but we'd like to see a couple more things. I'd like to see support from Global Affairs Canada to do a formal legal review of the bills. They've thus so far refused to do a legal review of the bills to clearly understand the impacts. We would also like higher political engagement at and diplomacy to bring resolution to this silliness. In terms of domino effects, 100%. You know, going to Oregon, Washington State, but the biggest risk is one state passing one of these, you know, rhetorical, sensational bills, and then those voices behind that bill then going to the Home Depots or the Procter & Gamble's and some of our big US-based customers to try to cast some kind of a dispersion. And these groups that are behind this bill are doing those very, you know, similar kind of misleading campaign activities against some of our biggest customers. So there's an existential threat here for sure. And it's absolutely critical that in 2 of the biggest US states that the government of Canada and our provincial government stand with Canadian forestry workers.
Excellent. And just as a follow-up, so you are seeing assistance in actively helping to lobby and speak with state legislatures from the federal government and from our Trade Commission offices?
That's correct. In both California and New York, we have had on-the-ground consular support. We've had tremendous support from provincial governments as well. But we're getting to a point here. You know, the Governor Newsom vetoed the first bill in California because he said this is completely unmanageable and unworkable for any small business in California to figure out if you want to get into the procurement game. A couple of months later, the same assembly member brings the same bill back. It's an election year in California. It's an election year in New York State. So we'd like to see a little bit more senior political engagement on the file.
Now, to my earlier question, and just to get your thoughts, again, from a federal perspective, I mean, when working with the United States, I mean, through the adjudication process, we've gone through WTO and NAFTA and CUSMA. But because these actions are taking place on a state level, is there anything that we can do to appeal those on kind of more of a national level? Or is it just our actions on the ground and what we can do?
The actions, the diplomatic actions on the ground are the first step to get this fixed. If that doesn't happen, our review shows that if these bills are passed, they would violate trade agreements. I'm not a trade lawyer. I can't. Mark might be able to help here, but I can't. But there would be mechanisms whereby governments could take action. But we prefer not to get to that point, and we believe through through top to top diplomacy with our provincial and federal governments, we can end the silliness.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Bolden, now that your time is up.
Thank you, Madam.
On to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our presenters. And one of the questions I have, and it's the softwood lumber dispute has been before us for many, many years. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie. The provincial Ministry of Natural Resources was located at the Roberta Bondar building, where I used to work with the Ministry of Training, College Universities, the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines. So I've had quite a few coffees with some of the folks that worked on it for the province in this dispute that was going on and on and on. And they explained to me, simplistically, that in Ontario, and it would seem in probably other places of Canada, some of the logs that are being forested are located on Crown property, as opposed to the Americans, as they would call them, the lumber barons, that some folks, a small group of them, have a monopoly on, and they really seem to control the political agenda, no matter what government seems to be there, through their efforts as well. And what's really unfair is that what all this does, because the demand seems to be high, the Americans continue to build. They need logs, they need wood, they continue to purchase it with these American tariffs on it. So what this results in is a tax. They're taxing themselves. They're taxing the middle class, and as we call the folks working hard to join it, that are particularly hit hard. Would any of you have any of the data of exactly how much in dollars these tariffs are resulting in American houses? I don't know if Derek or anybody would have that, and if you don't, perhaps you could get it to us.
I'll maybe defer to Susan in terms of the National Home Builders data. Susan, would that help?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very good, and again, I'll send it to you after the committee is over. There's a very good analysis done by the National Association of Home Builders, who've worked in partnership with Canada for years. It used to be a relatively small sum on a house. It used to be around, $5,000 to $8,000, Michelle, give or take. It's now up around $30,000, and so that's a very substantial change. And of course, that's pushing people out of household, being able to purchase a home. So, when we talked, when Ms. Gray asked about, well, what can we do? What are the lessons learned? We can be focusing more on that. It is not part of the Biden administration wants to have affordability as one of its things that's really important. And this actually flies in the face of it. So, the work that we can do to support what NAHB are doing and to make sure that people understand what this is costing them directly, I think would be very helpful.
That data would be very, very helpful to us, because the Trade Committee has gone to Washington and has, gone to the United States, and we're discussing where we, as a committee, would go to, and we usually go when we go to Washington. We have a number of meetings set up through the embassy, and that kind of data would be very, very helpful, because it's really important to get in to the face of the American legislatures to tell them that, because a lot of times when we were down there for the steel, they would be like, what? like they didn't know that information. So that would be very helpful. And just keeping on this, what other groups in the United States do you work with? Are you working with their Chamber of Commerce? Are you working with their unions, other folks as well, that just to get that kind of messaging across about how much damaging they're doing to their own middle class with these punitive tariffs?
Well, I'll start and maybe turn over to Derek. We work very closely with the United Steelworkers, who represent a lot of our industry. They've been very vocal about this alongside of us. Of course, the Chamber, there's the Canada-US business groups that, we've worked with from time to time, and we're trying to tell that exact story, but it's very hard. It's a very competitive marketplace, and to try and get traction on any issues in the Beltway area is very difficult. And frankly, if you're trying to do a concerted lobbying effort, as we did try to do industry and government back in the early 2000s, it's very costly. It's millions and millions of dollars. Derek, maybe you want to add any comments?
Yeah, and in terms of the bills I was talking about in California, New York, it's the same thing. So United Steelworkers and Unifor have been tremendous, really good partners of ours, along with the Indigenous Resource Network. And stateside, the California, New York forestry associations are very concerned about the precedent-setting nature of some of these dubious claims and terms that are being used. Same with the home builders in those states and our unions, brothers and sisters in those states as well. So lots of allies. There's no shortage of allies, which is a nice thing to have.
Okay, on to Mr. Martel, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Oui, merci. Ma question est pour Monsieur Labbé.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Labbé. Mr. Labbé, I'd like to once again go back to the caribou. My question is, do you think that we're pushing the protection of caribou a little too far by blaming the forestry industry for its survival or lack of survival? I'm not a specialist, but I am fully aware of files covering climate change, and certainly there are many studies covering the caribou in our forest area. Given that climate change is affecting 100% of our forests, the lumber industry is being unduly accused of mismanaging an area that the caribou is in. The caribou is likely to move, given climate change, to other territories, in any case, other zones. So I think what we really need to do is focus more on climate change itself, address that issue, and that will help the caribou. It will help everyone. Then, of course, there are temporary solutions that we can put in place, buy zone, and so on. Mr. Labbé, you've mentioned diversity and diversifying our production style. If you don't have access to raw materials, to commodities, then you can't really do anything with it, can you? That's correct. Getting the raw material is step one. To be quite frank about it, so when it comes to future demand, with our new approach to biodiversity and conservation, it's not going to lead to having more wood in Canada. We'll be able to protect the amount of wood we had. The only growth option is value-added growth. That's really the only way we'll be able to grow our sector, by adding value. So I imagine that if we reduce the amount of land we can work on, then small and medium-sized firms will suffer. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Labbé.
That's it. And you have 2.25 minutes left.
Yes, absolutely. Madam Tracy.
Yes.
I would like to share with Ms. Tracy. Yeah.
I thought somebody would like to have the remaining 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Never pass up an opportunity, so thank you very much. I have a couple questions for Mr. Warner. Mr. Mr. Warner, despite what we've heard from our trade minister, it appears that there's no progress on the softwood lumber agreement with the U.S. And the U.S. trade rep had said last summer that Canada wasn't interested in engaging on softwood lumber, but Minister Ng stated on several occasions that softwood lumber is a top priority for the Canadian government. In your view, has this been a top priority for Canada, being engaged and at the table on softwood?
I think the problem that I see is we've got to decide, I think, how to approach the United States generally with these sorts of trade disputes. I think from what I can see, this government has taken an approach of being very conflict oriented from the start on everything. We elevate and escalate really quickly. Now, as I said, I don't think that there is a litigation solution. I'm not even sure that most of these victories that we talk about in softwood lumber, there never really are as complete victories as the way they're presented when you're in Canada. They're really narrow legalistic victories, and that's why they don't stick. And that's why they're hard to enforce. But so from my vantage point, I think if we had a more coherent approach to trade negotiation overall, then with the United States, then I think we'd be more in a position to negotiate something like softwood lumber. But if you are going down to the United States to lobby against the signature initiative of an American president, and then you expect that same American president to say to his Secretary of Commerce, cut us some slack on softwood lumber, I think it's just not going to happen. So I think somewhere along the way, we have to decide, do we want to go this litigation route? Do we want to go escalating everything to DEFCON 1? Or do you want to find a way to sit down and figure out, are there some grand bargains that will go beyond this industry into others that will allow you? I think Susan talked about how this might have helped in some previous settlements. But I think that's what's missing here. What's missing here is, I don't think Americans are all that interested in whether Canadian politicians think that their middle class is being hurt, to be very honest with you. So we can go and lobby that. You're right. It will be expensive because that's a tough sell. There probably is an argument for sitting around the table and figuring out a way to settle it, but it can't be if you're going to take a very elbows up approach, in my view.
Thank you very much. Interesting comments, Mr. Warner. Every time you come here, you give us interesting comments. Ms. Dillon, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions will be for Mr. Sommeray. Picking up on what Member Sheehan was asking about, given that the Government of Canada has undertaken to work with the sector to defend Canadian interests, does the sector believe that the current softwood lumber dispute could be solved in negotiation? And does the industry think that this is the way to go about it? Well, listen, I think you heard my other colleagues speak to this issue. Eventually, there will be some sort of negotiation. Will it be solely on softwood issues, or will other topics be included? Hard to say, but agreements are the only way that trade disputes are settled long term. So we need to start dialoguing, and we need to dialogue based on common interests, trying to find a way to reach out to each other. Diplomats and soldiers both work somewhat similarly. You've got lawyers now, and you've got government officials. We all need to get together to bridge the gaps and find a lasting solution. Thank you. And is this a general opinion? Do people agree on that? Yes, I think so. I heard Ms. Yukovic say so. Mr. Cripps said so. And I heard Mr. Nyber discuss this as well. And Mr. Vincent and Mr. Labbé, as well as Mr. Warner. So I think that all of today's witnesses are telling you here and now that we'll have to sit down at the table. Team Canada is the approach that the sector thinks is the best way forward, and that we should get going on it as soon as possible. We're ready to come play on Team Canada. Thank you very much. And how are the ups and downs of tariffs on Canadian goods affecting Canadian companies? All right, well, the level of tarification shifts from year to year. It's kind of all decided in a black box that the American trade officials work in. And the tariffs are a factor of great uncertainty for us. The only thing that we can control is our cost. Cost affects how well we compete on the market. But then that other factor, that unknown, the tariffs, also has a considerable effect on our markets, our market share, our ability to invest, to supply for demand, and to buy wood and then to sell value-added wood products too. It's very difficult for the sector to foresee a stable future in order to undertake the transformation required to create value-added products into the coming decades. Very well. In your opinion, do Canadian companies and workers in this sector feel the effect of this pressure? Well, yes, obviously, it's clear that firms are affected. As we've said, we're now heading up to $7 billion just sitting in an in-trust account at the border. 7 million or billion, unclear the interpreter. This fund amount cannot be invested in transforming the industry. This is a serious problem. We can't attract new skilled labor. We can't develop the sector. Obviously, workers are affected. And we need to find a way to ensure that those funds can be used to shore up the sector and transform it.
On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2 minutes.
Excusez-moi, pardon.
I'm sorry. So, yes, Mr. Nybor, you said earlier, and correct me if I misunderstood you, you said that the provinces have tried to step up, but Foreign Affairs Canada, Global Affairs Canada, perhaps has a little more to do. So what would you expect from them?
First thing I'd like to see is I'd like Global Affairs Canada to support by doing a legal review on both bills currently on the floors of the legislatures in Albany and Sacramento. I think that's the first thing, just to confirm what our belief is that these bills would violate trade agreements. Secondly, through diplomacy, working with U.S. governments, stateside governments, partners in the U.S., our customers in the U.S., continuing to share with them and do those meetings to talk about how our forests are actually managed here in Canada. It's a lot of misinformation. I think a lot of people forget more than half of our forested areas in Canada are actually unmanaged. You know, they might be managed by local communities in the far north, but 48% of our forests are managed. And out of that managed forest, half of that forest is under some kind of a conservation measure today, because forestry in Canada is inherently about conservation, local values, managing for multiple values from species at risk to flood and fire risk mitigation. So a lot of work goes into the planning in forestry in Canada, and it can't be simplified, which is what's being done in terms of some of the terminology we're seeing stateside.
Alors, en 50 secondes.
In 50 seconds. Well, I don't think I'll be able to get into another point, so I'm just like to take a moment to thank all of you.
Grillo for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm going to take your 50 seconds. Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you to all the witnesses today for that look into the future as well, the talk about transformation, even talk about value add, potentially coming back in more or strengthening in Canada. That's very interesting. So there were also a number of comments about the changing global dynamic, just based on what we're dealing with the COVID vaccine, but also what was happening with with Ukraine. So thinking about that, I was wondering if there has been changes, and I guess this will be for Mr. Kripp if you don't mind, if there have been changes in language and thinking about future planning, even in regards to lack of containers, not having the drivers in the industry. So, if there's been a change in just that language and future planning and how, your groups are thinking about it, what does the Canadian government need to know to consider to support industry workers and for your future?
So thank you for the question. And what I'll do is I'll just jump in on some of the things my colleagues have flagged, and that's real supply chain issues and costs and cost structures. And we're seeing a huge issue with respect to rail service in Northern Alberta in particular. And I think by extension, other provinces. I know Susan and her jurisdictions had lots of issues because of floods and fires and the like. But if the Canadian government can really look at infrastructure from a logistics perspective, from a rail company perspective, and ensuring that the rail companies are providing services that I believe they are fiduciarily charged to provide to northern communities. And most of our members in Alberta are actually only served by one of the rail companies, and as a result, it's caused an increased cost in terms of the lack of service on rail cars this year, and it seems to be an annual issue. So I think a real focus on our logistics and infrastructure needs across Canada, on rail in particular, would be really helpful. It's not directly related to softwood lumber, but it's absolutely directly related to the cost of our industry, and reducing the costs will actually help viable forestry companies continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fast. You're the last commenter on that side today.
Thank you very much. My questions are to Mr. Nybor and Ms. Yurkovich. Nice to see you both again. It's been a while. I listened carefully to your testimony, and I just wanted to quote back to you. Ms. Yurkovich, you said, with these types of disputes, the leader of Canada and leader of U.S. get together and resolve it. We just haven't seen that yet, end quote. And Mr. Nybor, you said something similar. You said, quote, top-to-top diplomacy would stop the lunacy, end quote. So am I correct? Are you both suggesting that there hasn't been top-to-top diplomacy over the last few years since the softwood lumber agreement expired?
Maybe I'll kick off and then, and thank you for your question. I think what I said before is I was talking about the conditions that we've seen in the past, indeed, when the last deal was done. What you have is a few conditions that are in place. I talked about some litigation water under the bridge, some money piled up, which the U.S. industry has its eye on, and then some levers, some other things that are not lumber related. And when you have those conditions, then it becomes a leader to leader conversation to try and push, because the industry in the U.S. must be brought to the table. And that's only something that the leader of the United States can do. And so that's, I think, the context of what I said. Yes, it will require absolutely the Prime Minister and the President, but the President has to get the U.S. coalition to come to the table and engage, or there's nothing we can do to get this thing resolved the way the trade laws are in the U.S.
And for me, Mr. Fast, I think about, can you imagine if one of our provinces said, well, we're not going to have any American wine here anymore. We're concerned it's just not sustainable. Just think about that. And this is, so for us, we have the provincial government engagement. We've got labor, Indigenous, other partners engaging. We've got the foreign public service and our diplomatic corps in the U.S. engaging. But I do think this is situation critical. This is a multi-billion-dollar problem in the making, and we're going to need more political support in the weeks and months ahead.
Can I ask, in the lead up to the CUSMA negotiations, was your industry actually approached to see whether softwood lumber could be included in those negotiations? Quite frankly, I would have liked to have seen that because of the leverage, the additional leverage that would have provided in terms of a larger negotiation. Was that a discussion that was ever on the table?
There was conversations about that, and I think you know better than probably most people around that table, given your history, how difficult this file is and how contentious and political it has been. The one thing that I will say from a BC perspective that we were absolutely mission critical on is that we have dispute resolution mechanism, and we got that essentially all similar to what we had in the previous agreement. And that's critically important because with any trade agreement, you are going to have, like with any relationships, you're going to come up with disputes. And that was, you know, if there was one thing that we were absolutely dead set we had to have, it was that, and we got that.
Okay. Thank you all very much, the witnesses, for the very valuable information. Appreciated it. To the committee members, witnesses for the Canada-Ukraine study, we need those to be submitted, please. And for the clean technology, if there's any other witnesses, please submit them as soon as possible to the clerk. So thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to the witnesses again. Until the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. President.
Thank you.